I still hear the sound before I feel the pain, the sharp crack of skin against skin, the sudden silence of a ballroom full of people pretending not to see. My billionaire grandfather, who had just flown 6 hours across the country for this wedding, slowly stood up from his chair, his hand shaking, his eyes locked on my mother as if he had just seen her for the first time in his life. And in that moment, I knew nothing in our family would ever be the same again. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. The wedding was supposed to be perfect. That's what everyone kept saying. Perfect venue, perfect flowers, perfect guest list, perfect family image. But perfection is just a word people use to hide rot. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who would live through a moment where a single family event exposed years of buried cruelty. People wrote about birthdays, funerals, graduations, days that should have been joyful, but instead became scars. And as I read them, I felt that familiar tightness in my chest because my story started exactly the same way, with smiles that didn't reach the eyes. My brother's wedding was held at a luxury estate outside the city, white stone arches, manicured lawns, crystal chandeliers that caught the sunlight like diamonds, the kind of place people rent to look important, the kind of place my mother insisted on because appearances mattered more to her than comfort or kindness. Guests were already whispering when my grandfather arrived. You couldn't miss him. Not because he was flashy, he never was, but because wealth that old doesn't need to announce itself. His suit was simple, tailored, his watch understated but priceless, and despite his age, he carried himself with a quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside. This was a man who had built an empire from nothing, a man who had paid for my education when my parents couldn't, a man who remembered my birthday every single year, even when my own mother forgot. And yet, when he handed his invitation to the wedding coordinator, something strange happened. The coordinator frowned, checked the list again, then gestured toward the back of the venue. I noticed it immediately. They weren't leading him toward the family table near the stage. They weren't guiding him toward the front where elders usually sat. They walked him past the white linen tables, past the floral arrangements, past the soft music and champagne flutes, toward the service area, toward the trash bins. I stood up, my heels sinking slightly into the grass, my heart pounding as realization hit me like ice water. They sat my grandfather next to the trash, not metaphorically, not a little off to the side, right next to the metal bins where servers dumped leftovers, where flies hovered, where empty plates clattered. I looked around, waiting for someone, anyone, to fix it. My mother didn't move. She was at the head table, laughing loudly, her hand resting possessively on my brother. When her eyes met mine, I expected confusion, embarrassment. Instead, she narrowed them, a warning. I walked toward her, my pulse in my ears. "Mom," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Grandpa's seat. There's been a mistake." She leaned in close, her smile still frozen for the guests, and through clenched teeth she said, "Sit down. Don't cause a scene." "A scene?" I whispered back. "He flew 6 hours to be here." Her eyes hardened. "He's not paying for this wedding, so he sits where he belongs." That's when something inside me cracked. I turned back toward my grandfather. He was sitting quietly, hands folded, pretending not to notice the servers brushing past him, pretending not to hear the whispers, pretending not to see the way people stared. I walked toward him, and that's when my mother stood up. The music was still playing, the guests were mid-conversation, but her movement cut through the air like a blade. She grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "I'm fixing this. This is wrong." Her hand came out of nowhere. The slap echoed louder than the music. My head snapped to the side, my cheek burned, and the entire venue went silent. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then I saw my grandfather slowly push his chair back. He stood, and the look on his face wasn't anger. It was devastation. And just as he opened his mouth to speak, my mother said something that made the room gasp and made me realize the cruelty didn't start today. It had been planned all along. The words left my mother's mouth so casually, so cleanly, that for a moment I thought I had misheard her. "He was never meant to be honored here," she said, loud enough for the nearest tables to hear. "This wedding is about our family now." Not his. Not the man who raised her. Not the man who built everything she bragged about to her friends. My grandfather didn't sit back down. He stood there, tall despite his age, shoulders slightly slumped as if the weight of decades had suddenly pressed down all at once. His eyes moved slowly around the venue, taking everything in, the luxury, the smiles, the comfort his money had helped create. And then they landed on my brother. My brother wouldn't meet his gaze. That hurt worse than the slap. I stepped in front of my grandfather instinctively, my cheeks still burning, my hands shaking. "This is unacceptable," I said, my voice trembling but loud enough now. "You don't treat him like this. You don't treat anyone like this." My mother laughed, not nervously, not defensively. She laughed like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, waving a hand. "He should be grateful he was invited at all." The room shifted. People exchanged looks. Someone coughed. A bridesmaid stared down at her shoes like they'd suddenly become fascinating. That's when I realized something terrifying. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a seating mix-up. This was intentional humiliation. I turned to my grandfather, my throat tight. "Grandpa, please, let me take you somewhere else. We'll fix this." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and gave the smallest shake of his head. "No," he said softly, "let them show everyone who they are." That broke me, because I'd spent years defending my mother, excusing her sharp tongue, explaining away her cruelty as stress or high standards. But standing there, with my grandfather treated like disposable trash, I finally saw the truth I'd avoided my entire life. My mother didn't love conditionally. She loved transactionally. If you weren't useful, you were invisible. She turned to the guests, lifting her champagne glass. "Can we please move on?" she said brightly. "We're here to celebrate love, not dredge up the past." The past, she meant, was the man who paid for her first house, the man who bailed my brother out when his business failed, the man who quietly covered hospital bills she told everyone she handled herself. I felt my grandfather's hand touch my arm, gentle, steady. "Sit," he told me, "please." "I won't leave you back there," I whispered. He smiled sadly. "You already stood up for me. That's enough." Before I could argue, he walked back toward the service area himself, alone. Each step felt like a betrayal I was being forced to witness. I followed him with my eyes, my chest tight, my vision blurring. I noticed things I hadn't before. The way the staff avoided eye contact, the way guests pretended not to stare, the way my brother still hadn't moved. That's when the ceremony began. Music swelled, the bride walked down the aisle, applause erupted like nothing had happened, and my grandfather sat next to the trash, hands folded, listening to vows about loyalty and respect. Something inside me hardened. During the reception, my mother avoided me completely. She laughed louder than usual, posing for photos, soaking up attention like oxygen. Every time someone complimented the venue, she nodded proudly, as if she'd earned it all herself. I made my way back to my grandfather, carrying a plate of food. "They didn't even give you a menu," I whispered angrily. He shrugged. I've eaten worse." That sentence, so calm, so resigned, told me more about his life than any story he'd ever shared. As we sat there, a server accidentally knocked over a bag of trash, scraps spilled on the ground near his feet. I stood up instantly. "This is ridiculous," I snapped. The server froze, terrified. I'm sorry, I didn't know." "I know," I said, forcing my anger down. "It's not your fault." But my mother had noticed. She stormed over, heels digging into the grass. "What now?" she demanded. "Are you trying to embarrass me again?" "You did that yourself," I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "You always take his side." "Because he's right, and because he's your father." She leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume. "Not today," she whispered. "Today, he's just another guest." "No," my grandfather said suddenly. We both turned to him. He stood again, slower this time, but his voice was steady. "Today," he said, "I am done being silent." The room began to notice. Nearby conversations faded, chairs shifted, heads turned. My mother stiffened. "Sit down," she said through a forced smile. "You're not doing this here." But he didn't listen. He looked at my brother. And finally, my brother looked back. "Son," my grandfather said, his voice carrying farther than I expected, "do you know why I came today?" My brother swallowed. "Because your family?" My grandfather nodded. "Yes, and because I wanted to see what kind of man you became." The silence was suffocating. "I see now," he continued, "that you learned well from your mother." Gasps rippled through the guests. My mother's face drained of color. "You will not disrespect me." "Oh," he said gently, "this isn't disrespect. This is truth." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. "I was going to give this to you privately, but since you chose public humiliation, I think honesty belongs here too." My heart dropped because I recognized that envelope, and I knew whatever was inside it was about to change everything. The envelope looked heavier than paper should. My grandfather held it with both hands now, thumbs pressed along the edge as if steadying himself, not from weakness, but from the weight of the decision he was about to make. The entire venue felt like it had shrunk around us. Even the music had stopped, though no one could quite remember who turned it off. My mother recovered first. She always did. "That's private," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't get to air family business in front of strangers." My grandfather tilted his head slightly. "Strangers?" he repeated. "These are the people you invited to witness your son's vows. They should also know the truth of the family they're applauding." My brother shifted uncomfortably. The bride beside him clutched his hand, whispering something urgent I couldn't hear. He nodded absently, his eyes locked on the envelope like it might explode. "Dad," my mother said, switching tactics instantly. Her voice softened, sweetened. "Let's talk later. You're tired. You've traveled. Let me get you somewhere quieter." He smiled at her then, not warmly, not proudly, sadly. "I remember," he said, "when you were 8 years old, you broke a neighbor's window playing ball. You cried for hours, not because of the window, but because you knew lying would cost you more than telling the truth." Her jaw tightened. "You taught me honesty," he continued. "I've waited a long time for you to remember that lesson." I felt tears sting my eyes. Around us, phones were discreetly lowered. People sensed something irreversible was happening. He opened the envelope. Inside were documents, neatly stacked, meticulously organized, legal papers, letters, copies of contracts. He pulled the first page out and held it up, though no one could read it from where they stood. "This," he said calmly, "is the trust agreement I created 25 years ago." A ripple of murmur spread. My mother's breath hitched, just for a second. This trust, he continued, was meant for my grandchildren, all of them, education, homes, business opportunities, a legacy, not just money, but stability. My brother's face went pale. My grandfather's eyes didn't leave his. You've benefited from it already, he said, twice. My brother opened his mouth, then closed it. My mother stepped forward. That's enough, she said. You're confusing people. Those matters were handled legally. Yes, they were, because I trusted you. That word trusted hung in the air like smoke. He turned slightly, angling his body so more guests could see him. I trusted you to distribute the funds fairly. I trusted you to act as steward, not owner. I felt sick, because suddenly pieces of my childhood snapped into place. The scholarships I'd been told didn't exist, the business loan I'd been denied because the money was gone, the way my brother always seemed to land on his feet while I struggled. My grandfather looked at me then, and in his eyes I saw apology. I learned, he said, his voice wavering for the first time, that not all of the money reached where it was meant to go. The murmurs grew louder. My mother laughed, a brittle, hollow sound. Are you accusing me of theft at my son's wedding? He said, I'm stating facts, and today I saw confirmation of them. My brother finally spoke. Dad, what is he talking about? She spun on him. This is manipulation, she said quickly. He's trying to punish us because we didn't make him the center of attention. I sighed, he said softly. You sat me by the trash. That was your choice, but you've been discarding people your entire life. Gasps. Someone near the back whispered, Oh my God. He pulled out another document. This, he said, is a revision. My heart slammed against my ribs. A revision? My brother echoed. Yes, signed last month after I received proof. My mother lunged forward. You had no right. I had every right, he replied firmly. It's my estate. Silence swallowed the space between them. I came today, he continued, to see if there was any doubt left in my mind, if perhaps I'd been misled, if maybe I was wrong. He gestured around the venue, the trash bins, the service corridor, the stunned guests. You erased my doubt. My brother's voice cracked. What does that mean? My grandfather folded the papers carefully and slid them back into the envelope. It means, he said, that the trust no longer passes through your mother. My mother staggered back as if struck. It goes directly to those who showed integrity, he continued, those who stood up when it mattered. His eyes found mine again. My stomach dropped. I'm sorry, he said to me quietly, for not seeing sooner. Tears spilled down my cheeks. You don't have to apologize, I whispered. But my mother was shaking now. You're doing this to hurt me, she said, after everything I've done. You did a great deal, he said gently, just not what you claim. My brother looked between us, panic setting in. What about the wedding? He asked stupidly. What are people going to think? That was it. That was the question he chose. My grandfather straightened. They will think, he said, that character reveals itself eventually. Security had started edging closer, not because of him, but because of my mother. Her voice was rising, her composure cracking. You will regret this, she hissed, both of you. My grandfather didn't respond. Instead, he reached into his pocket once more and pulled out a small velvet box. I had one more gift, he said. The bride inhaled sharply. Is that, he nodded, a wedding gift, but not for the couple. Confusion rippled through the crowd. He turned to me. My heart stopped. This, he said, opening the box just enough for me to see the delicate gold ring inside, was meant for the grandchild who remembered what family actually means. My mother screamed my name, but before I could even speak, my grandfather said the words that shattered the illusion of the entire day.
And after today, he added, there will be consequences beyond money. The room leaned in because everyone could feel it now. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. My mother's scream echoed across the lawn, sharp and uncontained. "Don't you dare!" she shouted, her voice cracking as years of carefully managed control slipped through her fingers. "You will not humiliate me like this in front of everyone." But the humiliation had already happened, and for the first time in my life, it wasn't mine to carry. My grandfather closed the velvet box slowly, the soft click somehow louder than my mother's shouting. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't argue, he simply stood there, calm in the chaos, and that frightened her more than anger ever could. "You did this yourself," he said quietly. "I merely stopped pretending." The guests were no longer pretending either. Some stared openly now, others whispered behind cupped hands, a few discreetly stepped back as if the fallout might splash onto them. The illusion of a perfect wedding had cracked wide open, and underneath it was something ugly, something no amount of flowers or champagne could hide. My brother looked like he might be sick. "Grandpa," he said, lowering his voice, stepping off the stage toward us, "let's talk privately. Please, this isn't the place." My grandfather met his eyes. "It became the place the moment your mother decided to make a statement." My brother turned to her. "Mom, why didn't you just seat him properly? Why did it have to be like this?" She snapped toward him. "Because respect is earned," she said, "and I'm tired of bowing to someone who thinks money gives him power over us." A bitter smile touched my grandfather's lips. "Money doesn't give me power. Revealing truth does." That's when he did something none of us expected. He turned to the guests. "He apologizes," he said, his voice steady and dignified. "You came here to celebrate love. Instead, you witnessed honesty." No one spoke. Then, from somewhere near the back, someone began to clap. Slowly, hesitantly. One clap turned into a few more, then more. It wasn't loud, it wasn't celebratory, it was acknowledgement. My mother's face flushed deep red. "Stop it!" she snapped. "This is ridiculous." But the clapping continued, and I realized with a strange mix of relief and terror that the room had chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. Security finally stepped in, not to escort my grandfather out, but to gently position themselves between my mother and everyone else. Her movements had become erratic, her words sharper. She was unraveling in real time. "You think you've won?" she said to my grandfather, her voice trembling. "You think this makes you righteous?" "I think," he replied, "that it makes me finished." That word landed hard. Finished. He turned to me, his eyes softening. "Would you walk me out?" he asked. I nodded immediately, slipping my arm through his. As we began to move away from the venue, I felt my mother's gaze burning into my back. "This isn't over," she called after us. "You hear me? I will fix this." My grandfather paused. He turned slowly, one last time. "You've been fixing things your whole life. That's the problem." We walked past the tables, past the half-eaten meals, past the stunned faces. I felt like I was leaving a battlefield, one where no one had technically raised a weapon, but everyone had been wounded. Outside the estate gates, the air felt different, quieter, cleaner. I helped my grandfather into the car that had been waiting for him. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. "This should never have happened." He took my hand. "It needed to," he said gently. Some truths only surface when there's an audience. Before the door closed, he added, "Come see me tomorrow. There are things you deserve to hear without interruption." The car pulled away, leaving me standing alone on the gravel driveway. Behind me, the music started again. They tried to continue the wedding. That night, I didn't stay long. I avoided my mother entirely. I didn't speak to my brother. I collected my things and left while guests were still pretending to dance, pretending nothing had happened. But my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Messages from relatives, friends of friends, people I barely knew. "Is it true? What did she do? Your grandpa's a legend." And then a message from my brother. "We need to talk. Mom's losing it." I didn't respond because for the first time in my life, I wasn't responsible for managing her emotions. The next morning, I drove to my grandfather's house, a quiet, sprawling property he'd lived in for years without ever flaunting it. When I arrived, he was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I sat. He slid a folder toward me. This is what I meant by consequences beyond money. Inside were documents, legal notices, names, and one letter on top, from my mother's lawyer. My stomach dropped. "What is this?" My grandfather exhaled slowly. "An investigation," he said. "One that's been quiet until now." I looked up at him, my heart racing. Investigation into what? He met my eyes, his expression heavy. "Fraud," he said, "and something much worse." The room felt suddenly too small. "What do you mean, worse?" I whispered. Before he could answer, his housekeeper rushed in, pale and shaken. "There's someone here," she said urgently. "They say it's an emergency." "Who?" I asked. She swallowed. "Your mother." My blood ran cold, because I knew whatever she'd come to say next wouldn't be a plea. It would be a threat. My heart slammed against my ribs as if it already knew whatever was about to happen would change everything again. "She's not welcome here," I said instinctively, standing halfway from my chair. My grandfather lifted a hand, calm, measured. "Let her in." I stared at him. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said quietly. "Running from the truth is her specialty. Facing it is not." The front door opened before I could argue. My mother stepped inside like a storm contained in human form. Her hair was still perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were wild, darting around the room as if looking for exits, for leverage, for control. She froze when she saw the folder on the table. Then she saw me. "So," she said coldly, her lips curling, "so you chose his side completely." "I chose decency," I replied, my voice shaking despite myself. She ignored me and turned to my grandfather. "You think you're clever, pulling stunts like that at a wedding. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone I know." He didn't flinch. "You embarrassed yourself." Her laugh was sharp and brittle. "You always did have a flair for drama." "No, I had patience. You mistook it for weakness." She stepped closer to the table, eyes locked on the folder. "What is this?" she demanded. "You already know," he replied. Her jaw tightened. "You don't have proof." He slid the folder toward her. She didn't touch it. "I told you," she said slowly, dangerously, "this stays in the family." "That stopped being an option when you turned family into currency," he said. She finally looked at me again, really looked, and her expression shifted. Something darker crept in. "This is about you, isn't it? You poisoned him against me." I shook my head. "You did that all by yourself." Her eyes narrowed. Do you know what I sacrificed for you, for your brother? Do you know how hard it is to hold a family together? By lying? I asked quietly. By stealing? She slammed her hand on the table. I did what I had to. The house felt like it was holding its breath. My grandfather stood, slowly, deliberately. You took money meant for your children, he said. You falsified reports. You forged signatures. Her face drained of color. And, he continued, you used my name to secure loans I never approved. Silence. Then she smiled, a slow, chilling smile. You won't go through with it. You won't destroy your own daughter. I'm not destroying you. I'm stopping you. She turned to me then, desperation flashing through her anger. You need to fix this. Tell him he's wrong. Tell him you misunderstood. I felt tears well, but my voice was steady. I finally understand. That's the problem. Her face twisted. If this goes public, she hissed, your brother's life is ruined. His business, his marriage, is that what you want? My grandfather answered before I could. Consequences don't ruin lives, choices do. She backed away slowly, shaking her head. You always favored her, she whispered, always. That's not true. I favored honesty. She turned toward the door, then stopped. This isn't over, she said again, but this time the threat sounded hollow. When she left, the house felt heavier. I sank into the chair, suddenly exhausted. What happens now? I asked. My grandfather sat beside me. Now, he said, the investigation becomes official. Accounts are frozen, lawyers step in. And my brother? I asked. He closed his eyes briefly. He will have to decide who he is without her protection. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from my brother. Mom says everything is falling apart. She says Grandpa is lying. Please tell me the truth. I stared at the screen, my chest tight, because for the first time, the truth wasn't just painful, it was dangerous. And I knew the next conversation would force me to choose silence or the final collapse of the family illusion. I didn't answer my brother right away. I stared at the message until the words blurred, until my reflection stared back at me from the dark screen. Tired eyes, clenched jaw, a face that no longer knew how to pretend. For years, silence had been my survival strategy. Say nothing, keep the peace, let things slide. But silence was how this happened. I have to talk to him, I finally said. My grandfather nodded slowly. Truth has a way of demanding witnesses, he said. Just remember, how he reacts is not your responsibility. I drove to my brother's apartment that evening. The place was chaos. Wedding gifts stacked unopened, his suit jacket tossed over a chair, his phone buzzing nonstop on the counter like a trapped insect. He looked worse than I expected. Red eyes, sleepless. The confident posture he'd always carried was gone, replaced by someone smaller, uncertain. You came, he said, relief and fear colliding in his voice. I wouldn't disappear, I said. That's not who I am. He swallowed. Mom says Grandpa lost his mind, that he's trying to control us. I exhaled slowly. What do you think? He hesitated. Too long. She told me the trust money was complicated, that there were delays, that you didn't qualify for certain things. I nodded. Did you ever wonder why you always did? He looked away. I pulled out my phone and showed him screenshots my grandfather had shared earlier that day. Records, timelines, transfers. Clean, precise, undeniable. His face drained of color as he scrolled. She told me, his voice broke. She told me you didn't want help, that you were independent. I laughed softly, bitterly. I was denied help. There's a difference. Silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. She used you, I said gently, and she used me, just differently. He sank onto the couch, hands covering his face. My entire life, he whispered. She told me I had to protect her, that she was holding everything together. And now? I asked. He looked up, eyes glassy. Now, I don't know who she is without the lies. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't him. It was a number I didn't recognize. "This is Detective Harris. I need to speak with you regarding your mother." My stomach dropped. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Your grandfather has agreed to cooperate fully," the detective said. "Your name came up as someone who may have relevant information." "About what?" I asked, though I already knew. "Misuse of funds, forgery, and potential witness intimidation." My heart pounded. Intimidation? "There are concerns," he continued, "that she may attempt to pressure family members into changing statements." I thought of her words, "You need to fix this." "I understand," I said quietly. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. I went back inside. "They're involved now," I told my brother. He stared at me in horror. "You went to them?" "No," I said. "She brought them here herself." He stood abruptly. "She can't go to jail." "That's not for us to decide," I said. "She's our mother," he snapped. "She did everything for us." I felt something snap then, not violently, but cleanly. "She did things to us," I said firmly, "and you know it now." He turned away, pacing. "If I testify against her—" "You're not testifying against her, you're telling the truth." That stopped him. Later that night, I drove back to my grandfather's house. He was in his study, reading, as calm as ever. "He knows," I told him. "My brother, he knows." My grandfather closed the book. "And?" "He's terrified of losing her, of losing himself." My grandfather nodded. "That's the cost of clarity." There was a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't my mother. 2 officers stood outside. They were polite, professional, final. "We have a warrant," one of them said. I didn't cry. I watched from the window as my mother was escorted from her house across town later that night, still dressed impeccably, chin raised, eyes burning with fury when she spotted the camera phones. She didn't look at me, but I felt her blame like a physical thing. The next morning, headlines began to circulate quietly, not viral yet, but murmurs in business circles, whispers among relatives. My brother called me before noon. "I'm coming with you to see Grandpa." When we arrived, my grandfather welcomed us both. He looked at my brother carefully. "You're welcome here," he said, "but I won't lie to protect you from the truth." My brother nodded. "I don't want protection," he said hoarsely. "I want to know who I am without her." My grandfather placed a hand on his shoulder. "That," he said, "is the beginning of redemption." But as we sat there, trying to piece together something new from the ruins of what we'd lost, my phone buzzed again. A single message from my mother. "If you think this ends with me, you're wrong." And suddenly, I understood. The wedding was never the climax. It was the opening move. The message from my mother wouldn't leave my mind. "If you think this ends with me, you're wrong." I reread it over and over, each time feeling a different emotion crawl up my spine. Anger, fear, and something colder. Calculation. My grandfather noticed before I said a word. "She's not finished," he said calmly, as if commenting on the weather. "No," I replied. "She's desperate." And desperation, I was learning, made people dangerous. Within 48 hours, everything accelerated. My mother made bail. That alone sent shockwaves through the family. She didn't go home. She didn't call relatives. She didn't issue apologies. Instead, she did what she'd always done best. She went on offense. First came the emails, then the calls, then the stories. By the end of the week, I was being painted as the villain. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly had opinions. Old friends of the family began sending messages dripping with fake concern. "How could you do this to your own mother? Your grandfather is manipulating you. You've always been jealous of your brother." The narrative was clear. I was ungrateful, vindictive, unstable. And she wasn't done. The real blow came on a Thursday morning. My brother burst into my grandfather's study, phone shaking in his hand, his face completely drained of color. "He filed something," he said, "against you and against her." "What do you mean?" I asked. "He's claiming Grandpa isn't mentally competent," he whispered. "He's petitioning the court to challenge the estate changes." The room went dead silent. "That's evil," I said. My grandfather exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. I suspected she might try this. My brother looked at him horrified. "She's saying you're being influenced, that you were confused at the wedding." I felt my stomach drop. If she succeeded, everything changed. The investigation, the trust revisions, the truth. All of it could be delayed, or worse, buried. "She's forcing a competency hearing," my brother continued, "and she named you as the one manipulating him." The room tilted. Me? I felt my pulse spike. So now I'm the mastermind? My grandfather's voice was steady. "That's why she humiliated me publicly," he said quietly. "She wanted a spectacle, something she could later reframe as proof of instability." I felt sick. This wasn't emotional chaos. This was strategy. That night, my mother went public. She didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She posted a long, carefully worded statement about family betrayal, about an aging parent being taken advantage of, about a daughter with a grudge. Within hours, it spread. And then the call came from her lawyer. "I'd like to arrange a conversation, off the record." My grandfather shook his head. "No more private conversations." "I'll go," I said suddenly. Both of them turned to me. "She wants leverage. Let me hear what she thinks she has." Against my grandfather's instincts, but with conditions, we agreed. The meeting took place in a quiet office downtown. When my mother walked in, she looked different. Not frantic, not furious, focused. She smiled when she saw me. "You look tired," she said. "This has been hard on you." I didn't respond. She folded her hands. "I'll make this simple. Drop your support publicly. Say you were emotional, confused." "And if I don't?" I asked. Her expression hardened instantly. "Then you're choosing to destroy this family." "No," I replied. "I'm choosing to stop lying about it." As I stood to leave, she said something that stopped me cold. "You think your brother's with you?" she asked softly. "He called me last night." I turned slowly. "Why?" Her lips curved, because when everything collapses, people run back to what feels familiar. I left shaking. When I got back, my brother was waiting. He looked wrecked. "She's right," he said before I could speak. "I did call her." My heart sank. But, he continued, I recorded it. He held up his phone. She threatened me, he said, told me she'd ruin my marriage if I testified, told me she'd say my wife married me for money. My grandfather stood. That recording changed everything. Within hours, the investigators had it. So did the court. The competency hearing was fast-tracked. My grandfather took the stand. Clear, sharp, unshakable. When my mother was confronted with the recording, she snapped. Not quietly, not subtly. She shouted at the judge, at her lawyer, at the court clerk. And in that moment, just like at the wedding, the mask fell. The ruling was swift. The estate revision stood. The investigation expanded. And my mother was escorted out. Again, this time in front of cameras she couldn't control. Outside the courthouse, she locked eyes with me and mouthed 4 words, "You will regret this." But for the first time, I didn't believe her. Because standing beside me was my brother, and behind us was my grandfather, no longer silent, no longer alone. Yet even as the doors closed and reporters shouted questions, I felt it. The strange, hollow truth no one talks about. Winning doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in the ruins, wondering what comes next. The day my mother was formally charged, the world didn't end. No thunder, no dramatic collapse, no sudden sense of justice neatly wrapped in relief. Life just continued. And somehow that was the hardest part to accept. The news cycle moved on within days. A different scandal replaced ours. A new outrage, a new villain. But inside our family, time felt suspended, like we were all waiting for permission to breathe again. My grandfather returned to his routine quietly. Morning walks, tea by the window, reading without interruption. But something about him had changed. He stood straighter now, not physically, but emotionally, as if releasing the truth had lightened a burden he'd carried for decades. One evening, as we sat together watching the sun dip behind the trees, he finally spoke about it. He said, "I thought silence was kindness. I thought patience would teach her." He shook his head slowly. All it taught her was that there were no consequences. That sentence stayed with me because it explained everything. My brother struggled the most. Without my mother's voice guiding every decision, he felt lost. The marriage entered counseling almost immediately, not because they were broken, but because truth had finally arrived and it demanded adjustment. One night he came over and sat across from me, eyes tired but honest. He admitted, "I don't know who I am without her, telling me." I said, "You get to find out. That's not a punishment." He nodded. I used to think loyalty meant protecting her at all costs. I met his eyes. Sometimes loyalty means stopping someone from hurting others, even if that someone is family. The legal process was long, painfully so, but it was clean. Every document my grandfather had kept, every transaction logged, every lie eventually traced back to its source. She pled, not because she felt remorse, but because the evidence was unmovable. I never visited her, not out of cruelty, out of clarity. My grandfather asked me once if I wanted to. I thought about it for a long time before answering. I told him I already said everything that mattered, and I had. Months later, on a quiet afternoon, he handed me the ring again, the one he'd opened at the wedding. He said, "I want you to have it." I asked, "Why?" He replied, "Because you didn't protect me with money. You protected me with courage." I slipped it onto my finger, hands trembling, not as an heirloom of wealth, but as a reminder. The family didn't fully heal. Some relationships never do. A few relatives still believe her version, some always will. I learned that truth doesn't convince everyone, it simply reveals who is willing to see. And I made peace with that. The last time I saw the wedding photos was when my brother packed them away. He paused on one image, the smiling group, the perfect framing, the illusion intact. He said, "Funny, that picture was taken 10 minutes before everything fell apart." I shook my head. That's when everything finally started. Now, when I read comments on my YouTube videos, stories of people choosing silence to survive or courage to break free, I understand something I didn't before. Family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by behavior. Love isn't proven by control, it's proven by respect. And sometimes the most painful betrayal isn't the slap, it's the years you spend convincing yourself you deserved it. If you're watching this and you're standing at the edge of your own truth, wondering if it's worth the fallout, remember this: peace built on lies is fragile, but peace built on truth lasts.